Hi, I'm Len McDonald, and this is episode 7 of the Week 45 podcast. Good morning, Pete.
Good morning. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good.
Good. Are you ready to hit the road again today?
Let's do it.
Right on. You know, I was thinking about this quite a bit in the last few days as we're recording these podcasts. You know, it's one thing to take a trip in a car, and I guess what we're doing right now is we're doing a virtual trip.
It's true.
And I guess for people who haven't been to that part of the world, it's a chance for them to go sort of and see it through our eyes. But there's the real thing, and then there's the virtual trip, and they're both pretty interesting.
They are, especially when you're reminiscing and referring to your notes and bringing back those memories of the actual trip.
Right. The other thing that dawned on me, too, is that when I look back on my long, illustrious life, that most of my disposable income has been spent on travel. And I guess rather than accumulating material things, I've done more accumulating experience. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm not a terribly materialistic person, but travel has been a big thing for me.
Yeah. I think I follow a similar train of thought, and a lot of biographies and things I've read about people later in their life, they say that material possessions generally aren't the things that you remember and aren't the things that you cherish later on in life. It's more about experiences. So I tend to go along that path as well.
When I look at my life today at 70, I own 2 guitars and a kilt. And actually, having those 2 things, you can go a long way with a guitar and a kilt.
Right. I own 9 guitars and a toque.
So there you go.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like travel. Before we head on up the road, I just want to mention, as I've mentioned in some previous episodes, that if you're interested in becoming a friend or supporter of the Week 45 podcast, you can get in touch with me. You know how to find me on my website. You can email me. But we appreciate any support that you might offer to produce these podcasts.
We certainly do. It takes a little bit of time and effort and thought to put these together, so it's nice to have any support we can get, and we hope you guys are enjoying listening to them as well.
Absolutely, and I think clarifying that is important, because to the untrained eye, it seems like, wow, there's just 2 guys sitting back. They might even be drinking beer and talking to us. That can't cost a lot. There's a lot that goes into this. Okay, we're back in the car, and we're heading up Gulf Boulevard and heading north up the western coast of Florida, up through Tallahassee and the Panhandle and Panama City. I don't think there was anything particularly memorable about that stretch other than a really, really violent thunder and lightning and rainstorm in Tallahassee. You can get some pretty nasty weather coming off the Gulf of Mexico. And actually, I mean, a lot of the hurricanes that happened down in the southern United States end up coming up through the Gulf of Mexico and into places like Texas and Mississippi. So
For sure, and New Orleans and places like that.
So, Pete, at the end of the first day back on the road, we put about 1,000 kilometers on your car. 2 of our very last stops of the day, we stopped Mobile, Alabama for a bite to eat. And I remember we were kind of looking around and we weren't sure. It was later in the evening, too, and we found this place called the Blind Mule. Mm-hmm. And I think we kind of lucked out, didn't we?
Yeah, it was kind of in a unassuming part of the city, and again, looked a little dingy on the outside, and we walked in, and I remember thinking that it was either a really popular local spot or they were trying too hard and it wasn't going to be as good as you'd think.
I think we were both pleasantly surprised.
Oh, for sure. It was incredible.
It was. The next time you're in Mobile, Alabama, go to the Blind Mule.
Yeah, get the shrimp and grits. It was delicious.
So we stayed overnight in Biloxi, and then we started to make our way north. We went through Lafayette, Louisiana, Shreveport, Louisiana, and then we made our way up to Dallas, arriving in Dallas at 7 in the evening. On our way through Lafayette, we stopped for lunch, and again, an unassuming looking place. It was called Préjean's Cajun Restaurant, and we were interested in experimenting with all types of food, and Cajun would be no exception. We walked in through the door, and much to our delight, there was live music. I don't know what day of the week this was, but it was the middle of the day, and there was a 3-piece band with an accordion player, a fiddle player, and a guitar player.
Yeah, they were doing some Zydeco music, and the whole atmosphere in that place, it was pretty neat. A big old restaurant. It was pretty full. I remember there being a lot of people there, so it was obviously a pretty popular spot. Also off the beaten track, kind of off the highway, sort of surrounded by woods and stuff. So all of these places were generally found by an internet search in the car, on the phone. And I remember pulling up and going, well, this is a pretty funky place. It looks pretty lively. And we walked in, and like Dad said, right in the middle of the day, an awesome band. And it was neat to see the Acadian Cajun connection there, and how that music bears a lot of similarities to some of the music up from our area with the Acadian people. And I remember also the food being great, and it just had this swampy kind of feel to it, this backwoods sort of, come on in, and we got some music, we got some gumbo, we got some...
And the music was amazing. I think we were so taken aback to find live music in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And such excellent music, too.
I agree.
So we arrived at Dallas around 7 in the evening, and Dallas has been on my radar for close to 60 years. And no, it's not because of the Dallas Cowboys. Of course, most of you will know what I'm talking about. Is November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated on the streets of Dallas in Dealy Plaza. You know, I've been talking to Pete quite a bit about this event. I was 13 at the time, and it's probably, of all the things in my life, probably even more so than 9/11. And probably it was because of my age, being 13, that event stands out as the most memorable and shocking event that I have been through in my life.
You wear a black armband when they shot the man who said peace could last forever. And in my first memories, they shot Kennedy. I went numb when I learned to see, so I never fell for Vietnam. Got the wall of DC to remind us all, you can't trust freedom when it's not in your hands, when everybody's fighting for their promised land. And I don't need your civil war. Feeds the rich while it buries the poor. You're power hungry, selling soldiers in a human grocery store. Ain't that rich? I don't need your civil war. No, oh, no, oh, oh.
What do you remember about that day, if anything, back when you were 13 and you heard about the news?
I'd have to check a calendar, which we could probably do pretty quickly. What day of the week? I think it was a Friday, November 22nd, 1963. And I remember being in school, and there was an announcement came on the intercom that the president had been assassinated. And it wasn't a long walk from the school to our home in Hillcrest Street. And I remember walking into the house, and Mom was at the ironing board, and she had the radio on, and it was like the world stopped. It was really so shocking, because at that point, he was kind of the golden boy. He was sort of the great white hope, and he was very charming and charismatic. And a lot of people were profoundly affected by that particular event. I remember as a young boy, I remember my initial reaction was I was frightened. You know, we'd just come through the Cuban Missile Crisis in the early 60s, and there was a lot of tension between Russia and the United States. In my naivety, I thought, wow, this must have been perpetrated by the Russians, and this is going to unleash a world war. I mean, that's what I thought at the time.
Wow.
And, little did I know that, well, we don't know for sure. We know who committed the act, but we don't know to this day who was behind the act.
There's still a lot of theories bouncing around out there. I mean, even to this day, I'm listening to, modern day podcasts and reading articles, and there's still new theories coming out, and some of them are wild and some of them kind of make sense, and nobody really has the definitive answer to this day.
No, and there's been some documentaries and movies made about this too, and I don't think there's any question that there's more to this than a lone gunman in the Texas Book Depository. It just doesn't make sense. And from the forensics and where the bullets entered bodies and stuff like that. So, But anyway, that's not for us to figure out. I did want to go to the site of where he was assassinated because it's been in my head for 60 years, and I wanted to go there. And it's not like it was some, kind of closure. I just wanted to see the place where this happened. I remember we checked into a hotel and we took Uber and went down to Dealy Plaza. I recall it was a Sunday evening and there was literally no traffic. We parked the car, we walked a block over to Dealy Plaza, and there was very, very few people around. It was a beautiful night. It was very quiet. There was no traffic. And we could see on the roadway, there was an X marked on the roadway, and that's obviously the very spot where President Kennedy was killed.
Yeah, and it was very nondescript. It was just a small, very understated X. There was no plaque or no writing or anything indicating it. It was just there.
Yeah. For me, it was riveting to stand there. Like I was standing basically, those of you who remember the grassy knoll, and if you're of a certain age, you definitely remember what the grassy knoll was, standing on the grassy knoll, looking to my left at the Texas Book Depository, and then looking straight ahead on the road where the motorcade had passed along. There was just something about it after all these years of actually being there that I'll definitely remember that for the rest of my life.
Yeah. There seems to be a couple of times in history where things have happened that freeze the world or seem to pause time and make everybody kind of take stock of what's happening. I would say in my lifetime that was 9/11. There's probably a similarity in how things ground to a halt, everybody glued to their TVs, big time news, even though it's another country, even though it's not Canada. I guarantee every Canadian was well aware of 9/11 and also well aware of the JFK assassination.
Right. I was curious to know what your number one would have been, and I would have guessed that 9/11 might be the seminal event in your life when you think of what happened,
Absolutely.
That people could basically commandeer airplanes and fly them into some of the most iconic structures in the United States.
Yeah. It's funny how memories go, and when you mention a certain event, that everybody knows exactly where they were at that time. They can remember the exact thing they were doing. I mean, there's not many things in your life where it really takes you back, and you can ask just about anybody, and they have a crystal clear memory of that day, where they were, what they were doing, and watching it all unfold.
Before we left, I turned to Pete, and he had his camera with him. And because the traffic was so light, I wanted to get a picture. So I walked out onto the middle of the boulevard and stood on the X, and Peter came out and took this amazing photo, which you will see on the podcast. And it's one of my most memorable pictures to be a part of.
Yeah, like Dad said, we really lucked out. There wasn't much going on that night. It was super calm, not a lot of traffic, very, very still night. And I learned more about this event after the fact because you were so interested in it.
Yeah.
And it was neat to be able to capture that moment right then and there and just have the opportunity to have 5 minutes there where there was really nothing going on.
Yeah.
you know.
You mentioned that, that I'd given you a bit of a history lesson on JFK's assassination. I know that on all of our road trips, I think we both learned a lot, because as we were going along, you did most of the driving. I would be kind of looking at the map and seeing what was coming up ahead. And if there was, I know going through Alabama at one point in time, we were talking about the race riots and stuff in the 60s and the marches and all that. Mm. And I would be pulling up historical information on my phone and exchanging it with you. So you would have a sense of, what these things were.
Yeah, I remember that was an ongoing thing throughout the trip. There's long stretches of driving, so whenever you see something of interest and you get a little trivia, it's a nice little break.
On November 9th, 2015, we left Dallas early in the morning. Not that early. I have in my journal here 9:20, so that's kind of I wouldn't say a late start, but it's not super early.
Not super early, no.
Well, and again, Pete, on these trips where we didn't have any hard deadlines, we just kind of went with how we felt.
Yeah, we tried to be off the road around supper time if we could, or a little later some nights, but that was sort of the goal. But, for me, 9 was plenty early.
And it's kind of interesting, too, when you're traveling with anybody, there are certain, I guess, risks involved. And one of the things that we had talked about before we went on any of these road trips is that Peter's a night hawk and I'm an early morning guy, which is not the perfect recipe for traveling partners. But we made it work. We always stayed in the same hotel room, and I would just put in earplugs, and Peter wasn't being noisy or whatever. And I got used to having a light on, and there was no big deal. And in the morning, I would use the early morning hours to update this journal that I'm holding in my hand. Mm-hmm. So I would go down to the hotel lobby and have breakfast and have coffee and make my journal notes and write my week 45 posts. So I think we were able to accommodate each other's schedule quite nicely.
Yeah, I think it all worked out. And I remember using some of the later hours of the evening after you had gone to bed to edit the photos that I'd taken that day. And there was a little bit of give and take there in terms of I probably could have driven a little bit later every night. You probably wanted to get off the road even earlier, but we found that sort of middle ground that sort of worked. Yeah. And like I said, we both had our own time to work on our own things and get back on the road at a reasonable time.
Yeah, I think it worked out pretty well. Anyway, we headed out from Dallas. We went through Fort Worth, Texas, and Wichita Falls, and Childress, and Amarillo. Texas is a big, big, big state. And we made our way across to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Any recollections, Peter, of that particular stretch, or is it just more miles?
Well, I do remember passing Amarillo. I remember that old song, that Jerry Jeff Walker song that you used to sing quite a bit. What was the name of that one?
It's called London Homesick Blues, and maybe somewhere in this piece we can kind of fill in, but the song kind of goes,
well, I want to go home to the armadillo. Good country music from Amarillo and Abilene. They got the friendliest people and the prettiest women you've ever seen.
Okay, folks, we've just arrived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We didn't smell anything coming across the border this time, but I'm sure those cattle are still there. So, Pete, a pretty memorable leg of the trip coming up from North Reddington Beach and all the way up through Dallas and across Texas.
Yeah, for sure. The southern part of the States is really iconic for me. I mean, there's something about that part of the country that really draws me to it. And driving through Louisiana and Alabama and Texas and all these places, that was high on my list. And in fact, I'd love to go back there again at some point because something about being down there. It's a little warmer. Everything's a little different down there.
For sure. When we get back on the road next week, we have our eyesights on the Grand Canyon. And there's some wonderful stories around that part of our trip. And Pete, I think we'll both agree that the Grand Canyon was about to be one of the highlights of all of our travels.
Yeah, without getting too far into it, it is not overrated at all.
I have to say, people of my age, you don't get surprised anymore. You don't get wowed anymore. And the Grand Canyon is one of those places that is a wow. So anyway, thanks, folks, for tuning in. We'll get behind the wheel this time next week. Hope you can join us. And once again, if you like what we're doing and you'd like to become a friend or supporter of the Week 45 podcast and you want to send a few coins our way, we'd be very happy to have you part of the team. So, Pete, we'll see you behind the wheel in 7 days' time.
Sounds good.